This is a can of Bullseye Amber Shellac. It says right on the back here, not recommended for use as a sealer under polyurethane. Am I the only one who, when told not to do something, pretty much does exactly the opposite? Now, I don't do this stuff just because I have a rebellious streak. I want to know why. Maybe it's the scientist in me. I just can't take someone's word for something. I need to try it out for myself. And if you've been in the world of finishing for a while, you've heard that said, that you can't put wax shellac under a polyurethane finish. So I'm sure it comes down to the wax content providing adhesion issues for the polyurethane. But why specifically polyurethane? There are other varnishes out there made with other resins. Will those bind just fine? Is it something with the urethane resin molecules that don't bind to shellac that has wax in it? So that's kind of the question I want to answer. I want to use a few test boards using de-waxed shellac as one test, waxed shellac as another, and then just pure polyurethane on the surface as a third test. Now, just as a little disclaimer, this is not really a true test. I'm only doing 3 boards. I just want to see if I develop any adhesion issues at all using the waxed shellac. So let's talk a little bit more about the shellac products themselves. Now, the most common brand that I see in the stores is Zinsser Bullseye, and it's important to know the differences between the products that they have available. Typically, you'll see 2 varieties of the regular Bullseye shellac. One will be amber and the other will probably be labeled either blonde or clear. Basically, it just means it's not going to bring a whole lot of color to the wood when you apply it. Now, this is the waxed version. It's a 3-pound cut, so it's relatively thick, and it's good for building coats of finish. The de-waxed product is their Bullseye Seal Coat. Now, this stuff is only sold in clear. There's no amber or any other colors for this one. It's just clear, but it still will bring a little bit of ambering to the wood, so make sure you're aware of that. This is sold in a 2-pound cut. It's a little bit more dilute, which means it's more ideal for sealing applications. That first coat, you generally want to be pretty thin so it can soak in, dry quickly, and then you could sand it and start applying your top coats. So these are the 2 products I see the most. Now, if you go to woodworking stores or shop online, you'll find shellac flakes. Typically, these are just de-waxed flakes that you mix with a certain amount of denatured alcohol. Alcohol is the thing that dissolves shellac. Basically, and you can make whatever mixture you want. You can make it 3-pound cut, 2-pound cut, down to 1.5-pound cuts sometimes, just for spit coats of shellac, they call them. The primary thing that you're going to find people using this stuff for is, blotch control. It's for stopping, especially something like cherry, for instance, may have pockets of grain that absorbs more finish, so it gets a little bit spotty and dark. Other woods like, pines, certain softwoods are like that. Cherry and maple, soft maple, there's a lot of woods that just don't take finish very evenly. So it's important to apply a sealer first and then apply your top coats, and that helps the stain and your clear top coats look better on the surface. So that's why we're going to use this stuff. Now, incidentally, complete side note, but I want to make sure I throw out a little a shout out for Charles Neal's stuff. If you are looking for some blotch control, Charles Neal recently came out with his pre-color conditioner. It's a water-based product, and it works great for stopping blotching, so you want to check that out. Now, the polyurethane I'm using is Minwax Fast Drying Polyurethane. It's just clear gloss, nothing special. It was just the cheapest stuff I could find. Now, before I apply any finish, I need to make sure we're doing a sort of apples to apples experiment here. Remember, I mentioned that the seal coat is at a 2-pound cut. That's a little bit more dilute than what we have in the amber shellac, which is 3 pounds, so we need to make that dilution. Diluting shellac is actually kind of difficult because we're talking about the dilution itself is a volume of liquid mixed with a certain weight of solids. So coming up with the dilution can be pretty complicated, and in fact that's why we developed the calculator in the woodshop widget. That's exactly what I used to come up with this dilution. So let's dilute a little bit of this stuff. I don't need that much. So using the calculator, I told it that I've got a 1/4 cup, because that's the smallest line on here. I've got a 1/4 cup of a 3-pound cut. And if you don't see any episodes of The Wood Whisperer for a while, it's probably because Nicole killed me for using her Pyrex measuring cup, which, by the way, is not going back in the kitchen. This is dedicated to the shop now, which means I'll be going to buy a new one later on. Now, a quarter cup is, of course, 0.25 in a decimal form, and the calculator said in order to get this to a 2-pound cut, I need to add 0.11. That's a little bit less than half of 0.25, right? So half of 0.25 would be the next line up on here, would be basically 1/8 of a cup. So I'm going to go just under 1/8 of a cup. You know, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. Just get it pretty close. Okay, stir it up real well, and I think that'll be close enough. Since I'm going to use the same brush for both of the shellac mixtures, I'm going to start with the de-waxed and then take my brush, try to get as much of the de-waxed shellac out of the brush as possible, but then use that in the waxed solution. If you go the other way, it kind of messes up the experiment a little bit here. Okay. Now this first coat is going to absorb readily. The raw wood is going to be very thirsty. And of course, using a Sharpie to label this piece probably wasn't the best idea because it's going to run, but no big deal. And now for the waxed shellac. You'll notice an immediate difference in the color. That amber color that it brings to it when you use amber shellac is really, really nice. Ooh. It's like watercolors when you get that alcohol over the ink. Ignore the slight blue cast to my finish. Nothing to see here. And the third one gets nothing but the poly. Not being too careful here with my brushing technique. Just trying to get a nice even layer. Now I waited a couple hours to let the shellac dry and give my polyurethane coat on this piece a little time to dry. And with my temperatures, it's really all it takes is a couple hours. And shellac dries very quickly. The shellac was probably dry within a half hour, 45 minutes, but I just gave it some extra time. I'm just going to remove the dust here with a just lightly dampened paper towel. And now each board is going to receive another coat of polyurethane. Well, the first coat for the shellac boards and the second coat for the poly board. So you might be wondering why I only put on that one light coat of shellac onto each of those shellac boards. Well, the reason is that's exactly how I would use shellac. There may be an issue here where if you have a significant coat of shellac and then you try to put poly on top of that, maybe that's where the problems occur. Bottom line is, I don't care about that situation because I can't think of any time that I'm going to have a really thick layer of shellac and I'm just going to pile a layer of poly right on top of it. Anytime I use the shellac, it's going to be as a sealer coat, a very light coat into the raw wood, and then I'm going to come back with a poly on top of that as my primary top coat. So that's really what I want to know, because half of the time that's the questions that you guys are asking me is, if I use shellac as a sealer, will I have a problem with polyurethane? So hopefully that's the answer that we'll get from this. So with just one coat of poly, we have a significant gloss build on here. That's really one of the advantages of using a shellac undercoat, is the fact that that first coat of poly looks pretty intense. I mean, you could look at this board, which has 2 coats of poly, and it's pretty much the same thing. The good thing about using the shellac is that it dries so quickly. So with one coat, after one day, we have the same build that it might have taken us 2 days to get because we did 2 coats of poly on this piece. So either way, I'm going to give it a light sanding with 400 grit by hand and give it one more coat on all 3 pieces. I think 2 brushed on coats is pretty realistic and pretty close to what I usually would do on a project. So yeah, let's get started with some sanding here. I'm just going with 400 grit here. Here we go with one final coat. All right, that looks pretty good. So the only thing to do now is wait. I want to give it 3 or 4 days to cure. You can give it a little bit longer if you want to, but I think after 3 or 4 days, we should have a pretty good idea of whether or not we're going to have any adhesion issues. Now, it's actually been well over a week. I got caught up in a couple different projects and I wasn't able to get back to this until now. But about 2 days ago, I decided I wanted to come up with a couple ways to actually test the finish and see if we could somehow pull the finish back up. So let me show you what I did. As you can see, each board has a number of things stuck to it. I try to think of what I had laying around the shop. So we've got some duct tape here. We've got some aluminum duct tape that you might use for putting HVAC together. And we also have epoxy that was literally just dripped onto the surface. Now, I don't know what to expect on any of these boards, let alone determining a difference between them. So let's go ahead and start pulling these things off and just see what happens. So this is our polyurethane board, just poly. Let's start by peeling up this duct tape and see if any finish comes off. I don't see anything at all on the surface, so that was pretty good. This I might need a little help with. Now the aluminum tape, it's pretty sticky stuff. Once again, no damage there. Now let's see about this epoxy. I really don't know what to expect here. I'm just kind of I'm hoping that I could just pop these off. Let's try a nice sharp chisel. That's a little bit better. Now here's a spot where I actually started to chisel through the wood. What I want to look at is the area where the epoxy just peeled up off the surface. Let me see if I can't get a better result with the bevel down. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. So the epoxy definitely pulled the finish right up and we're left with bare wood here. Now this is the one with de-waxed shellac and poly on top. Okay, no damage there with the duct tape. This stuff is tricky to pull off. I don't really see any damage there, so I'm not really worried about this second one. Let's try and pop those off now. I think we're pretty much seeing the same behavior here as we saw with the polyurethane only board. So it's pulling the finish up regardless. All right, now I would, it's hard to say with something like this because this is obviously a very non-scientific test. But if there were any major adhesion issues, you would expect that things like this tape, very sticky tape, would pull that finish up. At least a little bit, or some evidence of it. And I don't really see anything coming up here. So let's move on to the epoxy and see if there's any difference and how these pop off. All right, absolutely no difference there. So what does this prove? Not a whole lot. Realistically, this is one very poor test to just see if we could detect a difference in this surface that was treated with the waxy shellac first. I didn't detect a difference. It behaved in the exact same way as the other two finishes, using de-waxed shellac as a sealer and no shellac whatsoever. I didn't see any evidence of a weaker bond between the polyurethane and the shellac layer. So I'm not prepared to necessarily say that we've hands down proven anything here, but I think we have sort of built a little bit of a case for the fact that that is somewhat of a myth, that maybe in some situations with some polyurethanes or some shellacs on some species of wood, maybe someday somewhere someone will have a problem with the binding of the polyurethane. But if I don't see any issues, and really if you think about daily abuse and things like that, putting duct tape on the surface and then peeling that back off, if there was an adhesion issue, I really would have to think that we would peel a layer of finish off of there. Of course, there's a time factor here. Maybe this is something that would happen a year or two down the line is when you would start to see these issues occur. But I can't imagine over that period of time this finish all of a sudden just peeling off if it's bound as strongly as it seems to be right now. So the point here is to just think about these things. I mean, I just saw a recent article in Fine Woodworking on finishing that specifically stated not to use waxed shellac because it will cause binding problems with polyurethane. And I'm just not seeing the evidence of it. So maybe this video in and of itself will bring out the folks who have a lot of experience and years of experience who can say, you know what, I've seen that before, and they can let us know about it. So I'm not refuting this just for the sake of being argumentative. It's just finding an answer for myself. So I can tell you safely, in my shop, if I've got a can of waxed shellac and I need a sealer and that's what I want to use, I'm just going to use it, even if I'm going to use polyurethane on top of it. I don't see any reason not to, at least at this point. But I always keep my mind open because you just never know. So hopefully you enjoyed my little non-scientific, pseudo-scientific experiment. These kind of things are always fun for me to do, and I hope you guys enjoy them. Thanks for watching.